In light of the article, My Introduction to Judeo-Sufism and Sunni Judaism, posted on punktorah.com and on hashlama.org, a number of people have contacted me with some questions about what is Sunni Judaism, or the Issuniyah in the Judeo-Arabic, and also known as the Issuniyim, and in the original Arabic, the Isawiyah. This is a brief overview, and it intends to clear up some misconceptions about the group, and I'm sure that it will lead to probably more questions, but it's just a basic overview. Well, in the video on the pseudo-epigraphical nature of the Epistle to Yemen attributed to Maimonides, I mentioned that the author seems to be referring to an amalgamation of different movements that were going on in Persia and the Babylonian region between somewhere the beginning of the Umayyad dynasty and the beginning of the Abbisids. Now, we have a number of different sources on what time the Isawiyah or Issuniyah uprising happened, but scholars today believe that this happened at the beginning of the Abbasid Caliphate. You will notice that there is a Wikipedia page. Here's one on Abbisids. Like most Wikipedia pages, it has some things right and some things wrong. You'll notice citation needed. That's because a lot of people say incorrect things based on what they've read in a secondary source that's not citing the primary source. For those who don't know, a primary source is the original source that we're drawing the information from, and the secondary source is an author later on talking about those primary sources. In a nutshell, that's the explanation of the differences. Well, it says right here, one of a line of Jewish pseudo-messiahs, of course, citation needed, in 8th century Persia. Well, that later on down here, what does it say? Abbisids believed that he was the last of 5 heralds from God announcing the imminent arrival of the Messiah. Never did he claim to be the Messiah himself, but some of his followers felt that he would return after his death and bring about the end of the age. Now, this is exactly what I'm talking about. All of the primary sources, which of course they're not quoting here because whoever made this page doesn't apparently know them. They're deriving this from a patchwork of secondary sources. The primary sources indicate that he is actually the first person that we have on record using the Arabic term Mahdi to refer to himself. And he didn't mean it in necessarily the loaded sense that it obtained in Islamic theology, and particularly in Shia theology. He meant it in the most basic sense of the word. He's saying, look, I'm a rightly guided teacher. I'm not Mashiach, is what he was saying. So actually, any secondary source that is calling him a messianic claimant or a pseudo-messiah is not quite accurate. However, because his movement was messianic in nature, and because a lot of people have thought of him in those terms, he is usually listed. We have here a Wikipedia page of Jewish messianic claimants, and I'm sure he's right there. Exactly, he's the first one, and his disciple is the very next one. Now here, these are actually not in chronological order. See, here we have Ishaq ben Yaqub, Obadiah, Abu Isa, al-Isfahani, or Isfahan, they write. and they have, contradictory information there, all in the course of one paragraph. Again, that's to be expected with secondary sources, because there aren't really a lot of secondary sources that have invested. I will show you some that have. His disciple is then next. We're not going to concern ourselves with that offshoot group. And then here, again, I said it in a non-chronological order. We have the individual that Maimonides, they don't even have a page for it, that Maimonides was amalgamating him with, or pseudo-Maimonides, as I said in that video, Serene. So that's unfortunate that there's not a basic page, but basically he was a Syrian pseudo-messiah, and he had some very rudimentary commonalities with the Isawiyah movement, but he predated it, and there were also some significant differences, and his group certainly was not even remotely as strict. In fact, it was more permissive than normative Judaism, whereas the Isawiyah was more restrictive in general and was a Nazarite movement. So he actually dates to the time that the Epistle to Yemen is referring to, whereas Abbisids does not. Now, this name that they've created here, Ishaq ben Yaakov, Obadiah, Abu Isa, al-Isfahani, this is itself a sort of construct of various titles that he was called by different authors. Today we would call those pseudonyms, so this is not a correct name. Even the fact that this is listed as if it were his name is somewhat uninformed. Sometimes he was called Muhammad Abu Isa, and this is assumed by really everybody who, everybody in the scholarly community who's studied him and written about him, that this was not really his name, that this was a sort of mystical designation, and that he was trying to say something with that name. Now, one thing that's often said, and I'm not going to totally try to refute that in this video, one thing that's often said is that the Isawiyah was called the Isawiyah because it was named after Abu Isa. In another video, I'll explain why that's not the case, and why the term Isa derives from the Arabicized Hebrew term that the Isawiyah was named after, and why, in fact, the Quran refers to Jesus as Isa rather than the normal Arabic Yeshua, akin to the Hebrew. The Quran doesn't use that term. It uses a very different term, and it's a key term to understanding the sectarian nature of the historical rather than the mythological Jesus of Christian myth and creation. This revolt happened at the beginning of the Abbasid Caliphate, and once they rose against the Caliphate, Abu Isa's large gathering of Jewish followers prepared themselves for a confrontation with the Caliphate, who had promised to confront them and crack down on them in the way that the Caliphate tended to do. Of course, we know how these things went. The Caliphate confronting and massacring the descendants and followers of Muhammad and his family. And we know, of course, that the Abbasid Caliphate had put Muhammad's family, the Al-Bayt, under house arrest because they so feared their disciples having an uprising or revolt against them. So what we see today in Egypt with Hosni Mubarak just being ousted, with Tunisia, and now with these series of revolts, this is a long time coming. These repressive regimes that have really just cracked down on the populations in the Middle East. This goes back all the way to the Caliphate, and thank God today people are finally seeing that when they use the modern tools that we have to network and correspond and coordinate, that they can throw off the shackles of their oppressors. So when the Isawiyah movement rose against the Abbisids, the legend has it, according to our sources, and we have different sources, we have Muslim sources and Karaite sources, the legend has it that they all lined up behind Abu Isa, that he drew a circle around them, sort of like Khoni, the circle drawer, and said some, magical words while the Abbisids, were there, and they were presumably somewhat mystified or tripped out by this. And so Abu Isa, this individual, crosses over then, and the legend has it, according to all these different sources, Muslim sources, the Abbisids, say this, that he crossed the line and then defeated them single-handedly. This, to me, the first time I read this, reminded me of the stories that the Europeans told of the kung fu masters that they faced during the Boxer Rebellion. Even after, they would finally kill them, they said, we eventually did kill them, but, they were jumping 20 feet in the air over our troops and, doing all of these sort of almost supernatural seeming things. It seems a little remarkable that the Abbasid Caliphate themselves and all of these different sources, none of which were Isawiyah sources or Sunni sources, why they would embellish this so much, that this guy was so, formidable. And there's a whole other offshoot issue there about how it's at this time that we start seeing the already existing myths and prophecies and so on of the Dajjal start to now take on this Jewish flavor. So you have these stories about the Dajjal before, nothing remotely Jewish about the character. And now all of a sudden you start seeing an amalgamation with the historical Abu Isa. It's another story. But this also is documented in one of the sources that I'll give you. So anyway, according to different accounts, some say he fled and was never seen again. The Isawiyah themselves say he did not die. They say that he went into occultation. Now, this is long before the 12th Imam of the Shia tradition. So they say he went into occultation, into ghaiba, and that he would return, at the end of the age. Does this sound familiar to anybody with any knowledge of Shiaism? Of course it does. It's the exact same thing. Now, if you have a JSTOR account, and I hope you do, you can just simply search for some key terms like Abu Isa, Isfahani, and you will find some. Well, actually, you won't find a lot. You'll find really the two scholarly sources that we have in. Well, there is a third actually in Turkish, but we're not going to get into that. So, in terms of what we have in English, that one's actually the most recent. Let's scroll down here. So we have Israel Friedlander's Jewish Arabic Studies, Shiitic Elements in Jewish Sectarianism. You have to start with this. You have to get a hold of this. I could possibly give it to you if you absolutely can't find it. But if you have a university JSTOR account, you should be able to get it. This is from the Jewish Quarterly Review, News Series, Volume 3, Number 2, October 1912, page 235 through 300. Get that, and then you'll see the Isawiyah Revisited by Stephen Wasserstrom, and that's in Studio Islamica, number 75, 1992, pages 57 through 80. That's your best starting place. Now, the same author, Stephen Wasserstrom, let's see if I can get some There we go. Here, let's turn it right there. He wrote this book, Between Muslim and Jew, The Problem of Symbiosis Under Early Islam. Now, unfortunately, this book is sadly out of print. I believe it was by Princeton University Press. You're not going to find it. I've contacted them, and they're not reprinting it. So, unless you're going to, dish out the money, then you're not going to get a copy of that. But I would encourage you to try. If you go to a university, you can usually, through some sort of library consortium, get a hold of that. I would encourage you to do so, because it basically expands on this article. You'll see just actual chunks of that article throughout it, but it goes into much more detail. It is, I would say, 85% spot on. So it has some issues, but it's really good. It's definitely the most exhaustive source undertaken on the Isawiyah and similar groups, so not completely just on them. Also the Mansuriya, also just different sort of proto-Shiitic, to use his term, groups, and you'll find in these articles, and you'll find in that book, I believe it was 15 points of correlation between proto-Shiaism and the Isawiyah. That's another story, and maybe I'll do a video on that too. This is just to sort of introduce you to the Isawiyah and the scholarly sources on it. The Isawiyah, according to the sources, the Karaite sources, the Muslim sources, and so on and so forth, the Isawiyah ceased to exist somewhere between 300 and 1,000 years after the uprising against the Abbisids. After the uprising against the Abbisids, they became a very, very small group, a very small sect. They were very big for a moment. Isfahan was sort of the crossroads of civilizations at the time. It was a place where really just different cultures were interacting and exchanging ideas and cross-pollinating, and it had been going on like that all along. So it was only natural that a Jewish movement that was pluralistic would take root there, or a pre-existing Jewish movement of that nature would find a home there, and then move out from there and go into occultation or ghaiba. Eventually, the group becomes so small that we have reports that there were only around 20 people or so in any generation who were, members of this group. Eventually, it just completely dies out, and it probably merged with what we see in Judeo-Sufism, the early, not the Hasidim, Rishonim, but the early Hasidim, the first people to meaningfully be self-designated as Hasidim in almost a sectarian way, and these were the Judeo-Sufis. This is actually where the later modern era Hasidim get the term from, is from the Judeo-Sufis. Okay, some of the secondary sources that you'll find: 50 Jewish Messiahs by Jerry Rabau. This will have some secondary material on it. You will want to fact check with primary sources in the 3 aforementioned sources that I gave you. The Jewish Messiahs from the Galilee to Crown Heights by Harris Lenowitz. This is an excellent book. This has a great little section on Abu Isa, and of course, what I showed you before, Between Muslim and Jew, The Problem of Symbiosis Under Early Islam by Stephen Wasserstrom. Check those out and get back to me. Shavua Tov.